Elizabeth Lesser, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I am over the moon to have you on the show for lots of different reasons, but you have most recently written a book, Cassandra Speaks. And Cassandra, does it matter?
I was just on a podcast earlier today with a woman from London, and
Mhm.
her name actually is Cassandra, but she calls it Cassandra. And both of us were being so kind to each other the whole time. I would say Cassandra, and then she'd say Cassandra, and we got thoroughly confused. So I don't know. You call it whatever you want, because I don't think there's a correct way.
All right, I'm gonna go with Cassandra then.
Okay.
And I love the subtitle, When Women Are the Storytellers, the Human Story Changes. But this is not your first rodeo by any stretch of the imagination. This is your fifth book, right?
I think it's my fourth. Yeah,
Fourth.
it's my fourth. Yeah, right.
And so you've written about the bone marrow transplant you did with your sister,
Yes.
and I love that. So this is my first introduction to you, and now I'm like itching to go back and read all of your other books. I'm especially excited about The Seeker's Guide.
That was my
So
first book. Yeah.
yes, and I'm just over the moon to dig in, but I have to tell you. So I thank you for Omega. Thank you so much for the retreat center, Omega. I'm curious how it's doing right now.
Mm. Yeah, Omega Institute, which I co-founded when I was about 20, 40 plus years ago. Um, and of course, what we founded way back then was just a little idea a bunch of kids had. And now it's a large conference center and retreat center in Rhinebeck, New York, in the Hudson Valley. And of course, when COVID hit, we had to shut down, and we have not been open for a year. And the impact, as most small business owners would agree, was devastating. We had to let go of a huge amount of our staff. We had 90 full-time people and many more seasonally. And it's been tragic. We're, as most organizations or businesses that have a deeper meaning, the staff becomes family. You're devoted to this mission. And that's been really hard. And for a long time, we didn't know if we would make it at all, because all of our income comes from being open. Whether you're a restaurant or a concert hall, this is just hitting everybody for whom their business is gathering people together in community to enjoy something. It's been tough. We're going to open in a very limited fashion this July and really hope that we can make it.
What can we do? What can the folks listen? Like, I've been to Omega twice, and I found so much solace there personally, and also lots of education. And it's the type of place where you want to be able to go there for years and years to come. So what can those of us who love Omega be doing right now for the organization?
To be perfectly crass,
Yeah.
send money now.
Okay.
We are a nonprofit. And one of the things that's the saddest to us is that we had finally figured out, after about 30 years of doing what we did. And in our early years, we were one of the only places where we were offering people education on like how to use food as medicine, or cross-cultural arts, or yoga, meditation, how doctors could use alternative medicine, just like a whole slew of things that was so weird in the culture. And now it's not weird in the culture anymore. You can take a stress reduction meditation class at the Y and things like that. So as it was getting more into the culture, we thought, what's our next real offering? And we knew it was going to be to offer this kind of inner technology, seeker technology, where you could calm all the weird stuff in your head so your own true voice might emerge. and healing paths might open up. We want to offer this to the people who need it the most, people who can't afford it, people whose work that doesn't pay that well, but it's the very work, teachers, home healthcare people, first responders, the very people who need this work. And we created a very strong scholarship fund. We started bringing lots of nonprofits to our campus for free. That's what we had to let go of the minute COVID hit. Like, there was no money to even keep the lights on, so we had to let go of that. So as we rebuild, that's what we want to rebuild the most.
Yeah.
So that's what any donations would be going toward.
Excellent. Well, I will put a link to donate in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. So that's
What a nice way to start. Nobody has started that way
oh,
ever with me. That's so sweet of you. Thank you.
well, I love that so much. I mean, so I went to, which in your book you talk about, you started the Doing Power Differently. And there, I think it was 2017, it was October of 2017. And it wasn't maybe the conference, it was the workshop leading up to, or either right before or
Right.
right after. And I met my PLP, my platonic life partner, at that workshop. And
Say that again. That's a thing. PLP. I love it.
yes, platonic life partner. I mean, she and I, she had just lost her father and was possibly going to have to take over the family business, and was hoping to learn more leadership techniques. And I was there with another friend of mine, and it's the first year of starting this business, Yoke and Abundance. And I wanted to make sure that I was being the type of leader I loved and respected. And I thought that that would be a great way to lay a foundation. And so that was really special. And I'd been there maybe a year or two before with Pema Chodron. And it's just such a special place. And you talk about how, you know, that the inner keys that we have now, yoga, meditation, maybe even shamanism. There's so much technology that has become mainstream because of places like Omega. And that's important and beautiful. And if we want to be able to continue that, we have to find ways to support it.
Thank you.
Okay, along those lines, because you got to see all of these different gurus over the years, one of the things you talk about in your book is that you became a great bullshit detector. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about that and what that means to you, and maybe how we can become bullshit detectors for ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I use it, of course, tongue in cheek,
Right.
because along with developing a great bullshit detector, which I have, I also have developed so much beauty and goodness and wisdom because of the people I have studied with. So I just want to make sure I have seen a whole lot of both. I've
Yes.
seen the light and the shadow. And people often will ask me, wow, you've spent 40 plus years like curating these this faculty that comes and goes over the course of our season, sometimes as many as 300 or 400 workshops and retreats. So what did you learn the most after all of these deep immersion? And, my first book, The Seeker's Guide, actually, I wrote it because I wanted to help people welcome in what they needed the most and learn how to have a bullshit detector. People often ask, what did you learn the most? And I always say that the teachers, the people we look to as these perfected beings, especially, I mean, it's one thing if you're learning how to knit, let's say, you're not going to expect that your teacher is like a living saint. And I try to make people understand that a lot of the people who teach about wisdom and empowerment and living your best life aren't necessarily living their best life. That just because someone's a great teacher doesn't mean they are a model citizen. I mean, we see this everywhere, whether it's religious orders where they find out the priest was molesting little boys or stealing the money, or, power corrupts, and it often corrupts anywhere.
Right.
So when you take the teacher off the pedestal, you stop expecting that person to be perfect. An interesting thing happens. You start expecting that you yourself become your own teacher. And that's what a really good teacher wants anyway.
Mm.
When I'm leading a workshop or something, which I'm reluctant to do because I've seen the power corrupted too much, but let's say I have taught many workshops. My deepest desire for the people in that class is that they would find their own soul song inside them and listen to it, not to me. So maybe better than a good bullshit detector, the word would be study with people who don't need you to follow them.
Mm.
More than anything, want you to follow yourself and to discover that part of yourself that's a good leader.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing it. I was thinking about you saying this tongue in cheek, I have a good bullshit detector, and understanding what you mean, and and I and having respect for those teachers that are so important for us. It made me think about a movie I saw during my positive psychology certification program. They suggested like an at-home homework assignment of watching the movie Kumare. Have you ever heard of this movie?
Yes, I've watched it and I'm forgetting what it is. I've watched so much television and movies during the pandemic that I forget. So could you remind me?
Yes, it all runs together now, doesn't it? Well, Kumari is this gentleman who
Oh yeah, yeah. He
he's
made up
Indian.
this. Yeah,
Yes, and he makes up being a guru basically, and kind of
right,
goes to a place where no one knows him, and has a film crew following him, and puts together this whole philosophy that's completely made up. And
right.
what I found so fascinating, I think, about that is that lots of people end up following him on this completely made up philosophy that still made a difference in their lives.
Right.
And so it is all about us in the long run.
Well, everything's made up, you know,
Right.
like if I often think of Jesus sitting on the Mount of Olives saying the Beatitudes, which is my favorite New Testament bit of wisdom. Um, and it is so precious and deep and such a spiritual teaching. It came from him. He,
Mm.
quote, made it up, as in he got quiet, he listened within, he prayed to utter words that might help people love themselves and transform. So that guy Kumari, he decided to be a fake guru, but even he began to believe himself because he was making up some really cool shit.
Yeah.
And and that's the funny thing, as you say, about that movie. It's like, what story do you want to make up about yourself and about this world?
Right.
What do you want to tell yourself? You can live by any story you want. It's always a choice.
Mm. Well, and that's a great segue into your book, right? Because there's so many different stories made up about women that we take for granted and we believe and have become a part of our DNA, whether we realize it or not, that if it had been told from our perspective or if it had been rewritten, things might be different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great segue into the book. Well done, interviewer.
Thank you. So, can you tell me why this book and why now?
Excuse me, I'm going to unding my dinger here.
Yes.
Okay. Why this book and why now?
Yeah.
Well, here, is this a podcast, or do you also show the video?
I might show the video. It's normally just a podcast, but
Okay, well, for anyone who sees this, I'm holding up the cover of the book, which is a picture of a goddess type woman with flowers all around her. And it's called Cassandra Speaks: When Women Are the Storytellers. The human story changes. So the stories that we call our origin stories, whether it's Adam and Eve or the Greek myths or many of our literatures or Bible stories, are stories made up. Some, unless you're a Bible literalist who thinks that the Bible dropped out of the sky fully formed, if that's who you are, I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but the stories we call our origin stories and myths were made up by people, just like Kumari made up a whole philosophy. And in most cases, the stories that have gotten under our skin about the reality of the world were made up by men. And there's nothing wrong with stories coming out of the mind and hearts of men, but it's missing the stories that come from half of the rest of us, who often have very different takes on what it means to be a human being. So let's take the story of Adam and Eve, which millions, billions of people think of as the origin story. This is how humans came to be. Even if we don't believe it literally, it lives in us as our origin story. So Adam was happy in the Garden of Eden. He was the only human in it. There were lots of friendly animals and plenty to eat, and God was taking care of him. And then, as the story goes, God felt Adam needed a helpmate. Maybe God got tired of taking care of Adam. I don't know. He could have. And Eve was created. So she was born second, created second, but Eve was the first to sin. So she has both these things hanging on her, our first mother. She was born second, an afterthought, first to sin. How did she sin? She was curious, and she followed a snake into the center of the garden. Now, in biblical days, the snake was the symbol of wisdom. And the snake said to her, "You should eat this fruit. It'll make you wise like the gods." And Eve said, "No, we were told never to eat this fruit or we would die." And the snake said, "No, you won't die. You'll become wise." And when I read that, being someone who's studied myth and symbolism, we all have to die. A part of us has to die in order to become wise. That is the hero's journey story. That everyone who wants to become wise has to let go of their parents. You have to individuate, leave home, leave the garden, go on a journey, have tests and trials, and then you can come home again to yourself and to wisdom. So the Bible is full of protagonists who do that, whether it's Job or Noah or Moses or Jesus for sure, who upset everything by leaving and finding his own way. Eve is the only being in the Bible who is punished for being curious and wanting wisdom. So the way that story's been told is that women are too curious. Women don't listen to directions and to the law, and they must be contained. And there's a lot of shame around women's bodies and around women really not being the kind of people that are dependable, are not to be believed. And that's the story that clings to us. And there's lots of them. I'll just tell that one.
I appreciate you sharing that story. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading your book, I feel like I hesitate for many reasons to use this word, but it's going to be important to the story I'm about to tell you. Um, it's it's a form of feminism in some ways. Your book is showing us a bit of of
That
how
are you, is the word you don't want to use feminism?
it is.
Oh, I use the F word all the time. I am a feminist. It is a feminist book, period.
Well, and so I'll tell you why feminism sometimes can. Okay, so I consider myself a feminist, and I feel like a lot of the things that you're talking about in this book, some of it I have experienced firsthand, and then some of it, so many women sacrificed and spoke up and worked so that I didn't have to experience it. And so some of the things in the book I couldn't relate to
Ah,
because I recognize that so much work has been done before.
awesome. I want to hear all about this.
Well, and it's interesting. And the reason why I hesitated so much with how to use the word feminist is because, and I asked my sweet boyfriend if I could tell this story on the podcast but I have, I've been dating someone for about 6 months. So we're still in that getting to know you stage. And we were having a really uncomfortable conversation within the last month about what each of us believe. But we were doing it with open hearts and listening. And he said, well, at least you're not a feminist. And my jaw hit the ground. Now he is kind and thoughtful, and he's just like so many wonderful things. And I just looked at him like he was like a three-eyed alien that had just been plopped onto my couch. I was like, darling, I am a feminist. Like, why is that a bad thing? And he's like, well, you're not trying to make me not masculine. And it made me think that maybe feminism has a marketing issue because
Well, yeah, this is my favorite subject.
okay, let's dive in then.
Okay. Um, well, first of all, you said there are these women on whose shoulders we all stand.
Yes.
And as long as they were called feminists, and as long as there's some work to do, I will call myself that. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't need to be feminists, or we didn't need to be a person working for Black Lives Matter? Or wouldn't it be great? I mean, it's a funny thing when you're both a spiritual seeker and you believe in the oneness of all. And then suddenly you're talking about, I'm a feminist, and you're like, yeah, well, why are you breaking things down from one into many? Well, because there still is structural racism and structural sexism. And so I shall continue to be a feminist as long as that is going on. At the same time, different generations, like I look at my sons, 3 sons, they're all fathers now. I'm a grandma. And they are fathering so differently from the way I was fathered, and even from the way my children's father fathered them. Like they are engaged 100%. They share parenting. Not, it's not like the men are like, I'll babysit now. No, they have this instinct to care actualized in them. I'm like, yes, that is because of the work generations of moms have done to try to equalize within the home. Now, it's not like that everywhere, but a lot of men are just so evolved compared to, and so that's one thing. The other thing is this idea of, if females are empowered, men feel it's somehow taking away from them, from their masculinity. So that if a woman is super strong and asking for equality and wanting their mate to be more emotionally intelligent, that somehow that's demasculating them. And that's what needs, to me, a rebranding, and has an advertising problem. And what I'm interested in is this is why the whole mixing up of genders is so kind of weird but exciting,
Yeah.
in that eventually to have a fully aroused masculine and a fully lived out feminine, it wouldn't matter if you were a man or a woman. It's like, as a woman, I feel more like I want to be like empowered, athletic, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean I'm not feminine. That just means I like that part of me.
Mm,
And so if your boyfriend or other men, and I don't mean to be putting him on the spot, um, if have a problem with that and are still like, no, the woman should really be more of the nurturer, the cook, the mommy.
mm.
I want to make the money. I want to call the shots. Well, I'm not, that's not my idea of a good time.
Right.
But if it's more like, I feel that feminism is asking me to be less of a man, and to me, a man means somebody who's strong and sure of who I am. Then yeah, feminism has a problem, but that's not what my feminism is.
Same, same. And he and I got there. We got there, but it was interesting because I thought, wow, I bet that a lot of people have the perception that he has, that feminism means, I guess, demasculating men or trying to make them all like women. And I didn't realize that that was the perception.
That is the perception.
It's
And
very
there's a
eye-opening.
lot of backlash these days. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Canadian writer Jordan Peterson, um, and a lot of the men's movement work where it's seen as these women are trying to feminize the culture.
Mm,
And my response always is, yeah, and so what? The culture has been masculinized for thousands of years. This is just a balancing act. It's not a, you had your time, dudes, now it's our turn. That's not what it's about at all.
right. It's about bringing in balance, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and uplifting both of those things and getting rid of the toxic masculinity, but as well as the femininity, toxic.
Absolutely, just toxic ego behavior, however it manifests. And that's where the spiritual work and the more social political work together so beautifully.
Mm,
Because as activists can get really hard and harsh around their rightness. I'm right, you're wrong. And that's where softening the ego, and
mm.
that's good work for a man or a woman or anyone, is so important to go hand in hand with the work we do to help the world.
Yeah, softening the ego. I like how you put that, and it is intense work, isn't it?
Mhm.
Oh my goodness.
I'd say it's the hardest work in the world, harder than, I tell a story in Cassandra Speaks about, I was once asked after 9/11 to lead some mindfulness meditation workshop for PTSD first responders in New York City. There was a lot of PTSD in the police and fire departments, and they asked a whole bunch of social workers and meditation teachers to come and do these short courses, maybe 5 or 6 in a row for workers who had really been traumatized. And I worked for, I think, 6 weeks, once a week, with a particular group of firefighters. And I loved them. And I think they loved me. And they were really good at all the mindfulness techniques, the meditation. They had no problem with it until often what happens, I don't know if you've noticed this, I can tell you're a meditator and a practitioner of mindfulness. Often in meditation classes that I'm leading or sitting in the silence, when you've sort of put down the crazy noise in your head, often people will start to cry.
Mm,
There'll be a releasing in the emptiness. There'll be this sudden coming into the heart. And
Mm.
people get very confused and concerned about this. What? I'm just sitting here. Why am I crying? I'm not, nothing just happened. And so this would happen in these meditation sessions. And the first responder guys, there'd be like, I'd open my eyes and I'd see them wiping a tear or stifling a sob. And when I tried to get them to talk about it, they wouldn't. That felt too like it was exposing themselves to the rest of the guys. And the rule among them was like, you don't talk about your feelings. That's something that the girls do. And no matter how I tried to jolly it out of them, like I told jokes, no, it was scarier for them to do that than to run into some buildings that had just been attacked by an airplane and try to save people. That was the scariest thing, to soften their tightly held sense of self and just share the vulnerable place all of us are in as human beings.
Right. And all of us at some point will be in that spot. So
Yes.
why not share the stories?
Yeah, it seems to be something that has really been beaten out of men more than women,
Mhm.
because old stories have hurt men as much as women. This
Yes.
idea that as men, you, in order to prove your masculinity, don't be like a woman, don't be a little girl, don't cry, don't show your feelings,
Mhm.
always be brave, always be strong. This is a yoke, to use your word, not you don't want to carry. It's
Right.
too heavy.
Yeah. And so put it down. Put it down.
Yeah.
Okay, you tell a personal story in this book that might have been one of my favorite pieces of the book. You talk about a piece of metal that got lodged in your leg when you met your first husband. Would you mind sharing that story with everyone and why it was important to the book?
Wow. No one's asked me about that story, and I've done 100 or more interviews in the past few months. Thank you. Yeah, that's a powerful story. Um, I was at
Stopped running. I was listening and when I heard it, and I stopped running to process what you had said. It was one of those moments
uh-huh.
to think about it. So it hit me, and I think that folks will enjoy hearing it.
Okay, so I curate these conferences every year at Omega Institute, a women's conference. There's lots of conferences there, not only about women. And this one I called Women in Power, just
Mhm.
exploring if women were able to describe the world in a different way, would we do power differently? And so I had invited to this one the playwright Eve Ensler, who wrote the play The Vagina Monologues. And she was leading an exercise, 400 women in the room, that she called Scars. And she wanted us to find a place on our body as we sat there with our eyes closed. Just what comes to your mind the first time when I say, is there a scar on your body that's meaningful to you? Don't do and you can be doing this with me now, everybody who's listening, like, don't do the like, well, there's one of my ankles, the picking game. Just like when I first say, is there a scar on your body that has a story to tell you? My hand went immediately to a place on my thigh where there is a scar. And I got that scar when I was in college and I met my first husband. We were digging topsoil to make a park in New York City. I was at Columbia University and we were making a park for the people. I was like 18 years old. And we were in a dump truck coming back from having dug dirt, and the truck stopped short, and a pickaxe flew down the bed of the truck and went right into my thigh.
Mm.
And a young man in the truck with us was in medical school, and he said, "Oh, let me help take that out." And he took the pickaxe out of me, and I went back to his apartment. This, long story short, he became my husband, and he said, "I think I got all the metal shards out of your leg," and you know that was quite a pickup line. But we went on to start Omega together, and we had two children, and then every once in a while, that place on my thigh where the axe had gone into my leg would kind of get infected and
Mm.
then close up again. I was always aware of it. And then as our marriage was falling apart, and as we had just decided to get divorced and we were no longer living together, and then we got divorced, and right around that time, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but long story short, one day in the aftermath of our marriage, as I was like, really could not let go of the decisions we had made and being a single mother and the dissolution of our family, and I was just so, still so upset, the scar started to feel activated again, and I put my hand down there, and a piece of the metal was coming out of my thigh.
Mm.
And he had not gotten it all out. And as it came out, and as I thought deeply, especially as I sat in that room with Eve Ensler leading this exercise with all these women, and women all around me were like crying or sitting there quietly with their hands on different parts of their body. I thought, what story was that about? What was that about? And I realized that I was still carrying within me, even though we were no longer together, this idea that without him,
Mm.
I was not a valid human being. That I I needed to let go of that idea that I had held my whole life, and that I think women have held their whole lives, that we're not, we are Eve.
Right.
We are born second, and we are first to sin, and there's something wrong with us and not enough. And it wasn't like I had to get rid of him because he was a bad person. It was that I had to finally be enough on my own.
Mm.
I had to let that go. And that's what the piece of metal finally leaving my leg was about.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, it makes me feel really emotional to hear you share that, because how often do we feel like we are not enough on our own?
Mm.
And
Thank you for having me tell it. Because, as you know, even though I can say to myself, I've let go of that piece of metal, I haven't. I haven't let go fully of the Eve story. It's something that, if it's been in women's bodies for thousands of years, it won't leave us right away. All that it matters, though, is that we pay attention to those voices that tell us we're not enough.
yeah, and then decide what we want to do with it.
Yeah,
And hopefully we'll do something that will impact the other women around us and the men too in a positive way,
correct.
and help us all tell our own stories.
That's that's if if someone were to say to me, I read your book and it gave me the courage to believe in myself and to proudly tell my story and put down some shame and fear, I'd feel really good.
Mm. Mhm. Well, it has for me. So thank you. I was listening today to, I normally don't do this, but I got really intrigued after I talked to your assistant, and I knew you were going to be on the show. I've been looking forward to it. And then a couple weeks back, I saw that you were on Tim Ferriss's podcast. And if someone's been on someone else's podcast that I typically don't, I pay attention to Tim Ferriss, but I typically don't listen to his stuff, in all honesty. But I was like, ooh, what is Tim gonna ask
Right.
her? And so, I was listening to it on my run today. And you talk about ADD, authenticity deficit disorder. Can you share a little bit about that? And then I have kind of a follow-up question to what that is.
Yeah. I mean, one of the buzzwords recently in the coaching world and the self-help world has been authentic. Are you being authentic to yourself? And um, I deeply embrace the subject of authenticity, but at the same time, it can be misused. It
Mm.
can be this kind of thing like, because I feel it, I'm going to say it and live it, like just because it's me. Um, so I wanted to write a book about authenticity, but I didn't quite know how to, because I didn't want to get into that whole mistaken identity of what authenticity is, and the whole idea of authenticity deficit disorder, which I made up, that so many of us go around not being who we really are, trying to conform to what we think other people want us to be, or we have to be that way, or if our skin is a different color, or we're the wrong gender, or whatever, like we're never able to truly be ourselves. And a few years ago, I was my sister's bone marrow donor because she had lymphoma, and the only way she could live would be if one of her siblings tested positive for a match. And it turned out, of her 3 siblings, I was the one who matched. Our DNA matched perfectly. And we decided to go through this psychological process together, we made up, like of trying to fall in love with each other deeply enough so that our cells, once my cells got into her body, would do the same thing, so she wouldn't reject them. Because we kind of felt like, hey, we've spent our whole life as siblings rejecting each other. Well, let's try to show ourselves there's another way to do this. And so what we discovered when we went through this process was that when you're a sibling, which most of us are, it's really hard for us to be who we are in front of each other, because we're always like being compared to each other or in competition with each other. So from the youngest age, we get these messages not to be ourselves, like be like your sister, be nice to your sister, or all, and it's not only siblings, it's just that we use that experience to kind of rattle ourselves into, here's who I am. Do you love me for who I am? Here's who I am. And then the other sister saying the same thing, and going through this process of, well, who are you? What's important to you? What do you love? Who do you want to be? And that process we did together was so powerful to understand that I can be who I am with all my flaws and all my gifts, and you will still love me. Because that kind of gets to the bottom of the problem for us humans. Will you love me if I am who I am? And who we are is not always pretty, and it can be imperfect, and it can be messy and unformed. And so we try to hide that from each other. And it's this game of hiding out from each other where we're never just authentically, whoops, I can be a jerk sometime. Do you still love me? I'm sorry. All the things it takes to just present your true humanness to another person. So what do I mean by authenticity deficit disorder? All the things that keep us from being our true selves around each other.
From showing that real unveiled self.
And sometimes we veil ourselves because we think we're going to make the other person uncomfortable if we show our gifts, if we show our talents. You know, let's say the story with you and your boyfriend. Poor boyfriend, I'm sorry, but let's just pretend like you're afraid to show your boyfriend how strong you are now that he's told you, I don't want to feel emasculated. So even if maybe he didn't mean that, you start hiding your strength, and without talking about it, all these stories build up and we don't even know anymore what the other person wants or who you are.
Yes. I wanted to bring up this idea of ADD because I was reading Seth Godin's recent book, and he makes a point quite forcefully that he thinks that it's not authenticity that we really want. We don't want a surgeon to be authentic if they were in their, had a fight with their wife the night before and we're about to perform surgery on you now. You don't want them saying, oh, I might not do my best work. I'm being authentic. And I just thought, I don't think he really knows what authenticity means because we're not saying don't bring your best self to the table. I don't think it means that, but it means your most raw self in the moments that matter.
And in the moments where it's appropriate.
Right.
You don't have to throw appropriateness out with the window when we're engaging with these perennial mysteries.
Yes.
I mean, these are mysteries. So the word authentic is going to have all sorts of problems and appropriate times and inappropriate times. It's no one has solved a lot of these big human mysteries from Aristotle's time and on. So of course, Seth Godin, whose some of your work is great, and sometimes you're just like trying to be, you know, I don't know, never mind.
Like all of us, we want to get our work out in the world, and so we're looking for a hook to do it.
A hook. I think that's a hook because no, I would not want my surgeon to say, "Oh, I sure hope I don't take out the wrong organ. I really had a fight with my wife this morning." No, I wouldn't want him to say that, nor would I want him to drag that in. But here's what I would want him to do. I would want him to be able to go to his boss and say, I don't think I should perform surgery today. I had a fight with my wife and I'm really off balance. Right. Now that's authentic, but often people don't do that because they don't want to show they're weak. So they aren't authentic.
Yeah. To segue to something a little bit different, but along the lines of something else we were talking about, towards the end of your book, you share a story about one of the Planned Parenthoods. There was a murder or a bombing. There have been several, and the leaders of both sides decided this is not achieving what either side wants. So let's get together kind of secretly, I think it was, and build relationships with one another. And I was really struck by that because it was before this very tough conversation with my boyfriend. And you talked about, well, how liberal am I? I think I'm paraphrasing here, like, how liberal am I if I'm not inviting in folks who have a different perspective than I do? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because this, I think, is a powerful story that many of us, it would behoove us to embrace.
Thanks. Yeah, I just yesterday was going through a very similar thing where I had written on my Facebook page, my author's Facebook page, I wrote a short piece about how I had gotten my second vaccine shot. And getting it reminded me of when I was a little girl. And my parents took me to get the polio vaccine.
Mm,
It was actually talked about in the country, the whole country, how this was a patriotic duty and everyone did it. Now, I'm sure there are some people who didn't, but I was just saying, too bad that we can't all embrace this as a way to end the pandemic.
mm,
And of course, I got pushback from people saying, I felt hurt. I love your books. I think of you as a friend almost because your books
mm.
are so personal. And I didn't get a vaccine and I don't wear a mask and I don't plan to, and I just have a different opinion than you, but you're making me wrong. You're shaming me. And then other people, as will happen on social media, started saying the meanest thing to this person, just like mean. So I usually don't respond on Facebook to anything, but I had to get in there and I had to say, look, we can disagree vehemently with each other, but we can still humanize each other. We can still talk to each other because there's a long track record of people tribalizing themselves to the point where wars start. This is how wars start. That is not incendiary to say that. That is the truth. If we can't, we talk about diversity all the time, and liberals like to think I'm woke about diversity, when it comes to race and sexuality, feminism. But diversity of opinion and diversity of politics, that's a form of diversity. Different opinions will never go away. They will not go away. And they're actually important. Like we need each other to bounce ideas off of, to come to the middle, to evolve as a culture. And if we can't look across the gap of our differences, of our different opinions, and see another person standing on the other shore who's maybe has a story to tell why they won't get a vaccine that is at least worth you listening to,
Mm.
and not indicting that person immediately as a less than important, ignorant person deserving of your vitriol, then that is not being a spiritual seeker, and that is not being an open-hearted, woke human being. So that's what I think. I think it's very important for us we don't have to change our opinion,
Mm.
but we can humanize the other person.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. There's another, I want to be cognizant of time, but I have like a couple more questions. One more question. There was something that my jaw dropped so hard when I read it in your book. Okay, so my background is corporate America. I spent a decade working for a Fortune 500 company in sales before I went off to I was doing yoga and whatnot during that time, opening a yoga studio, closing a yoga studio, and working full time. It's pretty successful at my work in corporate America, even though I was juggling all of this other stuff. I so often would go into meetings and keep my mouth shut, even when I thought I had good ideas. And and I would do that thing where I would not, if I said something too much in one meeting, I would quiet myself in the next meeting and try not to talk too much because I didn't want to be seen as, I'm a pretty emotional human being, and I brought that to the table in my work, and it never felt like it was embraced. It always felt like it was like, oh, that's Alisha being emotional again. And when I read the passage in your book that men talk so much more than women, statistically speaking, and that women will do that, it's statistically proven that women will do that. What I did in meetings, I thought, oh my God, why aren't we talking about this?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's the commonly held belief that women just talk so much and men are the strong and silent type and women shouldn't, but it is all the social science uh, studies done and corporate studies done and military studies done that men there are different kinds of talking. There's the more personal kinds of talking and sharing, and then there's the more sort of what is called mansplaining now, just kind of like sharing opinions in a very strong way. I know what's right, and men, I forget also what the percentage is, but an enormous percentage more in the workplace do men speak like that and women hold back with this sense of shame if we talk too much.
Mm.
We were taking up too much space. We didn't give the guys a sense. They're going to think I'm bossy. They're going to think I'm controlling. They're going to think I'm emasculating. If I seem smarter than them, that's not good. And those are old, old stories. You know, Cassandra, the namesake of my book, um, was cursed by having her voice taken away. And this is what women have been told through the ages: don't talk a lot, don't take up too much space. And we see what happens to women in politics when they do. Um, and women are called, you know, bossy and controlling and for doing things that men always do. That's not to say that let's all become more bossy and shout over everybody else. That's not it at all. But you might ask yourself the next time you're in a meeting or with a group of friends or in your marriage or whatever, are you withholding your opinion for a good reason, or is it something old working within you that is telling you your voice is not as valid as someone else's?
Well, I appreciated that you put that into the book because it was certainly eye-opening for me. I'm wondering if there's anything else you would like us to know or to share about your book or your work.
I think we've covered a whole lot.
We have. Well, I've got one final question for you. It's, how do you live a life of abundance?
Well, I guess the answer would be, what do you want to be abundant in?
Mm.
And I I think what we're all lacking the most is love and a sense of being seen. So I like to love on people as much as I can, to really stop and listen to people and to make them feel that they are being seen and listened to, because it comes back. It just comes right back to you. Not so like uh, a life of abundance to me is a life of love.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your wise words and stories with us.
Thank you for having me.